The galaxy stretched endlessly, a canvas of shimmering stars and swirling nebulae. Among its countless worlds, one stood apart. Luminara, the radiant homeworld of the luminal race. Its skies glowed with hues of gold and silver, reflecting the crystalline structures that dotted its surface. These crystals were no ordinary gems. They pulsed with cosmic energy, sustaining life and technology across the planet. For centuries, the Luminals had thrived under the leadership of their royal family, guardians of peace and prosperity. At the heart of this legacy was Princess Lysara, the youngest heir to the throne. She was unlike any other ruler her people had known. With luminous skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in dim light and eyes like twin galaxies, she carried herself with quiet grace yet radiated strength. Her voice commanded respect without demanding it, and her wisdom often surprised those who underestimated her because of her youth. To her people, she was not just a princess, but a symbol of hope, a promise of brighter days ahead. But Lysara's destiny reached far beyond Luminara. Recent tensions between neighboring star systems had escalated into open conflict, threatening the fragile balance of power in the region. As an ambassador for her people, she volunteered to lead a diplomatic mission aimed at forging alliances and averting war. It was a bold move, one that many elders cautioned against. Yet Lysara insisted. "If we do not act now," she said during a council meeting, "the darkness will spread, consuming everything we hold dear." Her journey began aboard the Orion, a sleek spacecraft adorned with intricate patterns resembling constellations. Accompanied by a small crew of trusted advisors and pilots, she set course for the neutral zone where representatives from both factions awaited. The voyage took weeks, during which Lysara spent hours studying reports, preparing speeches, and gazing out at the endless expanse of space. Despite the weight of her responsibilities, she felt a spark of excitement. This mission wasn't just about diplomacy. It was about proving that unity could triumph over division. Unbeknownst to Lysara, however, danger lurked in the shadows. Deep within the void, a fleet of ships drifted silently, cloaked from detection. They belonged to the Vorith, a species notorious for their cruelty and greed. Once a proud civilization, the Vorith had fallen into ruin after depleting their own resources. Now, they survived by preying on weaker races, enslaving populations to mine precious materials for their insatiable needs. Their leader, Warlord Vrax, had learned of Lysara's mission through intercepted transmissions. To him, she represented more than just a target. She was a prize worth seizing. As the Orion approached the designated meeting point, all seemed calm. The stars twinkled innocently, and the hum of the ship's engines provided a soothing backdrop. But then, without warning, alarms blared throughout the vessel. Red lights flashed as sensors detected incoming objects moving at incredible speeds. Before anyone could react, the Vorith fleet decloaked, surrounding the Orion like predators circling prey. "Activate shields," shouted Captain Renar, gripping the controls tightly. His knuckles turned white as he maneuvered the ship, trying desperately to evade the barrage of plasma bolts raining down upon them. Explosions rocked the hull, sending shockwaves through every corridor. Crew members scrambled to their stations, shouting orders amidst the chaos. Lysara stood frozen for a moment, clutching the edge of a console as the ship shuddered violently. Then, steeling herself, she moved toward the bridge. "We must protect the crystals," she called out to her guards. "They cannot fall into enemy hands." Her words echoed through the commotion, but there was little time to act. The Vorith unleashed warding pods, breaching the Orion's defenses with terrifying efficiency. Clad in black armor and wielding weapons crackling with energy, the invaders flooded the corridors, overwhelming the crew. Lysara watched helplessly as her protectors fell one by one, their cries drowned out by the cacophony of battle. In the end, resistance proved futile. Outnumbered and outgunned, the remaining survivors surrendered. Lysara found herself face to face with Warlord Vrax, his towering frame casting a menacing shadow. His eyes gleamed with malice as he studied her, clearly pleased with his capture. "You will make an excellent bargaining chip," he sneered, motioning for his soldiers to bind her. As she was dragged away, Lazara glanced back at her ruined ship, her heart heavy with despair. Yet even in captivity, a flicker of defiance burned within her. She vowed to escape, to return home, and to ensure that the Voreth's tyranny would not go unchecked. Far away, on a blue-green planet orbiting a yellow sun, two bounty hunters received an encrypted message. Kale and Mira, veterans of countless missions, sat in their cluttered quarters aboard the Eclipse, their trusty starship. The transmission contained sparse details, a missing alien of great importance, a reward too lucrative to ignore. But something about it intrigued them. Kale leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This smells like trouble," he muttered, his gruff voice tinged with skepticism. Mira, ever the optimist, grinned. "Trouble pays well." Little did they know, accepting this job would set them on a collision course with destiny, and bring them face to face with a princess whose courage would inspire them to become more than mere mercenaries. The Eclipse hummed softly as it sailed through the vast, star-speckled expanse of space. Kale sat hunched over the ship's console, his sharp eyes scanning lines of data scrolling across the screen. Mira stood nearby, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the swirling nebula outside the viewport. The two bounty hunters had spent years navigating the galaxy together, but this mission felt different, more mysterious, more dangerous, and neither of them could shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger than a simple retrieval job. "Got anything useful yet?" Mira asked, breaking the silence. Her voice carried a mix of impatience and curiosity. Kale grunted, leaning closer to the monitor. "Not much. Just some chatter about missing ships near Voreth territory. No names, no specifics." He tapped a few keys, pulling up a grainy map of the region. "But whoever sent us this tip didn't do it for fun. Someone out there wants us to find her. And fast." Mira frowned, walking over to join him. "Her? You think it's a woman?" "It's gotta be," Kale replied, pointing at a snippet of intercepted communication. "One of these smugglers mentioned a being of immense value. Could be royalty or some high-ranking official. Either way, she's important enough to make waves." Mira tilted her head thoughtfully. "If she's so valuable, why aren't there more details? Why leave it to random bounty hunters like us?" Kale smirked, though there was little humor in it, because whoever took her doesn't want anyone poking around, and whoever hired us knows we're good at staying off the radar. That was true, at least when it came to their work ethic. Over the years, Kale and Mira had built a reputation for taking on risky jobs without drawing too much attention. But this time, even Kale couldn't ignore the uneasy knot forming in his stomach. Something about the lack of information felt wrong. Still, they needed credits, and this job promised more than either of them had seen in months. Turning it down wasn't an option. The journey to Voreth territory took several days, during which the pair gathered what intel they could. They docked briefly at a seedy space station orbiting a dying star, trading favors with black market dealers for scraps of information. Most leads turned out to be dead ends, but one name kept popping up. Vrax, Warlord Vrax, leader of the Voreth. His name alone struck fear into anyone who heard it. Tales of his ruthlessness spread like wildfire among traders and scavengers alike. Entire colonies had vanished under his command, their populations enslaved to mine precious resources for his empire. "They say he's got a fortress on an old moon," Mira said, flipping through a stolen datapad. "Place is crawling with guards and traps. If our target's there, getting her out won't be easy." Kale nodded grimly. "We'll need disguises and a solid plan. Can't just waltz in guns blazing. Not if we want to live long enough to collect the reward." Their next stop was a derelict outpost on the edge of Voreth-controlled space. Here, they acquired forged IDs and patched uniforms resembling those worn by scavenger crews. The disguise wouldn't hold up under close scrutiny, but it might buy them enough time to slip past initial checkpoints. As they prepared, Mira noticed Cal growing quieter, his usual sarcasm replaced by a distant look. "You okay?" she asked, handing him a thermal clip for his blaster. He hesitated before answering. "Just thinking. We've taken on plenty of tough jobs before, but this feels personal somehow, like we're not just hunting credits this time." Mira smiled faintly. "Maybe we're finally doing something that matters." Cale snorted. "Or maybe we're walking straight into a trap. Let's hope your optimism pays off." The disguised duo approached the Vorath stronghold cautiously, their nerves taut as O-strings. The moon loomed ahead, its surface scarred by craters and littered with jagged debris. Once a thriving celestial body, it now served as a grim testament to the Vorath's exploitation. Massive mining rigs clawed at its crust, extracting glowing ore that pulsed faintly with energy. Automated drones patrolled the skies, their red sensors scanning for intruders. As the Eclipse docked at a supply bay reserved for scavenger ships, Cale and Mira exchanged a glance. This was it, the point of no return. Stepping onto the platform, they blended in with a group of weary workers unloading crates. The air smelled of ozone and metal, and the hum of machinery filled the cavernous hangar. Guards barked orders, their armored forms casting long shadows under harsh artificial lights. "Stay sharp," Cale whispered, adjusting the strap of his toolkit. "One wrong move, and we're done." They followed the flow of workers deeper into the facility, pretending to inspect damaged equipment while gathering intel. It didn't take long for them to realize the horrors unfolding within the fortress. Prisoners shuffled along catwalks, their faces gaunt and hollow. Chains rattled as they dragged heavy carts filled with glowing ore. Some stumbled, collapsing under the weight, only to be prodded back to their feet by Vorath overseers wielding electrified batons. Mira clenched her fists, forcing herself to remain calm. She hated injustice. It always brought out a fiery determination in her, but showing emotion here would only get them killed. Instead, she focused on memorizing the layout, noting guard positions and security cameras. "This place is a nightmare," she muttered under her breath. Cale nodded grimly. "Yeah, but nightmares can be broken." Their investigation led them to a maintenance tunnel hidden behind a malfunctioning conveyor belt. Slipping inside, they found themselves in a dimly lit corridor lined with pipes and exposed wiring. Here, away from prying eyes, they paused to regroup. "So far, so good," Mira said, pulling up a holographic map on her wrist device. "But we still don't know where she is, or who she is." Cale leaned against the wall, rubbing his temples. "Let's keep moving. Maybe we'll overhear something useful." Their luck held as they eavesdropped on a pair of guards stationed near a restricted access door. One of them complained about increased patrols in Sector 7, mentioning something about a high-value prisoner. The other laughed bitterly. "Bet it's that luminal brat everyone's talking about. Heard she's giving Vrax headaches." Luminal. The word sent a jolt through both hunters. Cal's jaw tightened. "Looks like we've got our lead." They continued exploring, piecing together fragments of information. Sector 7 was deep within the fortress, guarded by elite enforcers and protected by biometric locks. Breaking in wouldn't be easy, but they had faced worse odds before. What worried Cale most was the condition of the prisoners they'd seen. If their target had been subjected to the same treatment, how much fight would she have left? By the time they returned to their hiding spot, exhaustion weighed heavily on them. Mira slumped against the wall, letting out a long sigh. "This is going to take everything we've got." "And then some," Cale added, his tone resolute. "But if she's worth all this trouble, we owe it to her, and ourselves, to see it through." For the first time since accepting the mission, Cale felt a flicker of purpose ignite within him. This wasn't just about survival or profit anymore. Somewhere in this labyrinth of cruelty and despair, someone was counting on them, and despite his hardened exterior, Cale knew they couldn't turn away now. As the hours ticked by, the two bounty hunters finalized their plan, steeling themselves for the challenges ahead. Little did they know, their actions would set off a chain reaction that would ripple across the stars and change the fate of countless lives forever. The dim glow of the maintenance tunnel cast long shadows on Kel and Mira as they crouched over a makeshift map projected onto the floor. Their faces were illuminated faintly by the soft blue light of Mira's wrist device, highlighting both determination and fatigue. They had spent hours piecing together information about Sector 7, the high-security wing where their target was being held, but every detail only seemed to complicate their mission further. "We're going in blind," Kale muttered, tracing a finger along one of the marked paths. "Even if we get past the guards, those biometric locks will lock us out unless we can find a way around them." Mira frowned, chewing her lip thoughtfully. "There has to be a weak point. Every system has flaws. If we can exploit theirs, we might stand a chance." Kale raised an eyebrow at her optimism, but didn't argue. He'd learned over the years that Mira's idealism often balanced his own cynicism, creating a strange kind of synergy between them. It wasn't always perfect, but it worked. Most of their plan was risky, bordering on reckless. Disguised as scavengers delivering critical parts for repairs, they would infiltrate deeper into the fortress under the guise of routine maintenance. From there, they intended to sabotage key systems, creating diversions that would draw attention away from Sector 7. Once the chaos erupted, they'd seize the opportunity to slip into the restricted area and locate their target. Simple in theory, nearly impossible in practice. The next morning, Kale and Mira loaded up their gear, ensuring everything looked convincingly authentic. Toolkits clinked softly as they adjusted straps, while false identification badges hung loosely around their necks. Both wore patched uniforms smeared with grease stains, a deliberate attempt to blend in with the ragtag scavenger crews who frequented the station. As they stepped back onto the platform, joining a group of workers unloading supplies, Kale reminded himself to act natural. "Remember," he whispered to Mira, "keep your head down and let me do the talking if anyone asks questions." She nodded, though her grip tightened slightly on the toolkit she carried. "Got it. Just don't screw this up." They moved through the fortress with calculated precision, avoiding eye contact with guards and sticking close to other workers. The air buzzed with activity, machines whirring, voices shouting orders, and the metallic clang of tools echoing off the walls. Despite the noise, Cal's senses remained sharp, scanning for any sign of trouble. Their first objective was a power relay hub located near the central mining rig. According to their intel, disabling it would cause temporary blackouts across several sectors, buying them precious minutes to navigate undetected. Reaching the hub required passing through multiple checkpoints, each guarded by Vorath enforcers armed with energy rifles. Cal's heart pounded as they approached the first checkpoint, his mind racing through potential escape routes should things go south. "ID," barked a guard, stepping forward with a scanner in hand. Cal forced a grin, holding out his badge. "Routine maintenance. Power fluctuations reported in Sector 4. The guard scanned the badge, his glowing eyes narrowing suspiciously. For a moment, Cal feared their cover might crumble, but then the scanner beeped green. "Move along," the guard grunted, waving them through. Mira exhaled quietly as they passed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Too close," she murmured once they were out of earshot. "Yeah," Cal replied, glancing back briefly. "Let's not make that mistake again." Reaching the power relay hub proved easier than expected. The room was filled with humming conduits and blinking control panels, all overseen by a single technician, tinkering with a malfunctioning circuit board. Cal signaled for Mira to stay alert while he approached the man. "Need a hand?" Cal asked casually, gesturing toward the exposed wiring. The technician glanced up, clearly annoyed. About time someone showed up. "This thing's been acting up for hours." While the technician explained the issue, Cal subtly inserted a small device into the main console, a rigged override module designed to disrupt the flow of energy temporarily. Mira kept watch nearby, pretending to inspect adjacent equipment. Within minutes, the module activated, triggering a cascade of alarms as lights flickered and machinery ground to a halt. "What did you do?" the technician shouted, panic rising in his voice. Cale shrugged innocently. "Looks like a surge. Better call it in before something worse happens." As the technician scrambled to report the incident, Cale and Mira slipped away, blending into the growing commotion. Workers rushed to contain the damage, while guards mobilized to restore order. Amidst the confusion, the two bounty hunters made their way deeper into the fortress, inching closer to Sector 7. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors became increasingly treacherous as they neared their destination. Security tightened significantly, with patrols doubling and automated turrets activating along key routes. At one point, they narrowly avoided detection when a patrol rounded a corner unexpectedly. Pressing themselves flat against the wall, they held their breath until the footsteps faded into the distance. "This is insane," Mira whispered, wiping sweat from her brow. "How are we supposed to break into a place like this?" Cale smirked grimly. "One step at a time. Focus on what's right in front of us." Their final hurdle came in the form of a massive blast door sealing off access to Sector 7. A retinal scanner mounted beside it confirmed their worst fears. Getting through wouldn't be as simple as hacking a keypad. Scanning the surrounding area, Mira spotted a ventilation shaft leading upward. "That's our ticket," she said, pointing to the grate above. Cale groaned. "Of course it is." With some effort, they pried the grate loose and climbed inside, crawling silently through the narrow ductwork. Dust clung to their clothes, and the metallic taste of recycled air filled their lungs. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a dimly lit corridor just outside the restricted zone. Two guards stood post at the entrance, their weapons drawn and ready. Cale exchanged a glance with Mira, signaling silently. On his count, they sprang into action. Moving quickly and quietly, they incapacitated the guards with stun blasts, dragging their unconscious forms out of sight. Mira retrieved a handheld scanner from her toolkit, interfacing it with the retinal scanner. After a tense moment, the device emitted a soft chime, and the blast door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The sterile, utilitarian design of the rest of the fortress gave way to sleek, almost regal architecture. Polished floors reflected the soft glow of overhead lights, and intricate carvings adorned the walls. Clearly, this section of the fortress served a different purpose, one reserved for prisoners of great importance. Cale motioned for Mira to follow as they advanced cautiously. Each step echoed ominously in the silence, heightening their awareness. Then, rounding a corner, they froze. Before them stood a cell, its transparent barrier shimmering faintly with energy. Inside, seated on a bench with her back to them, was a figure clad in tattered yet unmistakably regal attire. "Is that?" Mira began, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale nodded, gripping his blaster tightly. "That's her." As they approached the cell, the figure turned slowly, revealing luminous skin and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies within them. Princess Lysara studied them with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. "You're here for me," she said softly, her voice carrying an unexpected strength despite her ordeal. Cale hesitated, unsure how to respond, but Mira stepped forward, offering a reassuring smile. "Yes, and we're getting you out of here." The moment Princess Lysara met Cale and Mira's eyes, something shifted in the air. Despite her captivity, she exuded a quiet dignity that demanded respect. Her shimmering skin bore faint bruises, evidence of the hardships she had endured, but her posture remained upright, her gaze unwavering. For a fleeting second, Cale felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't just another job. This was someone who mattered deeply to countless lives. "We don't have much time," Cale said abruptly, breaking the silence. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the corridor for any signs of movement. "If we're going to get you out of here, we need to move now." Lysara nodded, rising from the bench with surprising grace. She didn't waste words or ask unnecessary questions, instead stepping closer to the energy barrier that confined her. "The control panel is on the wall behind you," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "But it requires dual authentication, one manual override and one biometric scan." Mira frowned, already inspecting the panel. "Biometric? That complicates things." "It's keyed to my captor's retinal pattern," Lizara explained. "Vrax himself programmed the lock." Kale groaned inwardly. "Great, so how do we bypass it?" A flicker of determination crossed Lizara's face. "Leave that to me. I've been observing their routines since my capture. There may be another way." She gestured toward the panel. "Try accessing the system manually first. I'll guide you." Mira handed Kel a small hacking device, which he plugged into the panel. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as he worked quickly, his fingers flying over the interface. Meanwhile, Lizara provided precise instructions, her knowledge of Vorath technology proving invaluable. "They use outdated encryption protocols," she said, watching intently. "Exploit the backdoor sequence. They won't expect it." To everyone's relief, the barrier flickered and then dissipated, allowing Lizara to step free. She stretched her arms briefly before turning to face her rescuers. "Thank you," she said simply, though the weight of gratitude in her voice was unmistakable. "No thanks necessary," Mira replied with a grin. "Just stay close. We're not out of danger yet." As they retraced their steps through the fortress, tension mounted with each passing second. The initial chaos caused by the power outage had begun to subside, and patrols were returning to their usual routes. Every corner they turned seemed to bring them closer to discovery. At one point, they ducked into an alcove just as a group of Vorath enforcers marched past, their boots echoing ominously against the metal floor. "This isn't sustainable," Kale muttered under his breath once the coast was clear. "We can't keep sneaking around like this. They'll catch us eventually." Lizara tilted her head thoughtfully. "There's a detention block nearby where other prisoners are being held. If we free them, it could create enough distraction to cover our escape." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Freeing prisoners sounds noble, but risky. Are you sure?" "It's our best chance," Lizara insisted. "And besides, these people deserve freedom. Many of them have suffered far longer than I have." Kale hesitated, weighing the risks against the potential reward. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, but we stick together and move fast." The trio made their way to the detention block, navigating narrow service corridors to avoid detection. When they arrived, they found rows of cells filled with emaciated figures, men, women, and even children, all bearing the scars of forced labor. Among them was Zin, a former engineer whose sharp mind had earned him a reputation among the captives. His gaunt frame leaned against the bars of his cell as he watched them approach. "You're either very brave or very foolish," Zin remarked dryly when Kale began disabling the locks. "What's your plan?" "Getting out alive," Kale shot back, though there was no malice in his tone. Zin smirked weakly. "Good luck with that. But if you're serious about escaping, you'll need allies. These people may look broken, but they still have fight left in them." True to his word, once freed, the prisoners rallied behind Lizara with surprising enthusiasm. Though weakened by months, or even years, of captivity, they were eager to reclaim their freedom. Under Zin's guidance, they split into teams, sabotaging key systems throughout the fortress to maximize confusion. Explosions rocked distant sections of the facility, drawing guards away from the main pathways, while the prisoners created diversions. Kale, Mira, and Lizara pressed onward, using the chaos to mask their movements. Along the way, they encountered pockets of resistance led by Zin and others, who fought fiercely to protect their newfound allies. Kel couldn't help but feel a grudging admiration for their courage. It reminded him of battles long past, when humanity itself had faced similar oppression. At one point, during a particularly intense skirmish, Mira found herself pinned down behind a pile of crates, while Vorath soldiers advanced steadily. Just as she prepared to make a desperate stand, Lizera appeared beside her, wielding a makeshift weapon crafted from debris. Together, they'd managed to hold off the attackers until reinforcements arrived in the form of freed prisoners. "You didn't have to do that," Mira said afterward, brushing dust from her uniform. Lizera smiled faintly. "We're all in this together now." As the group neared the hangar bay where the Eclipse awaited, tensions reached a fever pitch. Guards swarmed the area, determined to prevent anyone from escaping. Realizing they couldn't bluff their way through, Kale devised a bold plan. Create a diversion large enough to draw most of the guards away, leaving only a skeleton crew to deal with. "I'll handle the distraction," Kale announced, gripping his blaster tightly. "You two get to the ship and prep it for launch. I'll meet you there." Mira opened her mouth to protest, but Lizara placed a hand on her arm. "Trust him," she said softly. "He knows what he's doing." Reluctantly, Mira agreed, following Lizara toward the hangar, while Kale veered off in the opposite direction. Using explosives scavenged from earlier sabotage efforts, he detonated a series of charges near the central mining rake, causing a massive collapse that sent shockwaves rippling through the fortress. Alarms screamed, and panic shouts filled the air as guards scrambled to contain the damage. Meanwhile, Mira and Lizara reached the hangar, dispatching the remaining guards with quick efficiency. As they boarded the Eclipse, Mira took the pilot's seat, running pre-flight checks, while Lizara monitored the entrance, keeping watch for Kale. Minutes dragged by like hours. Just as Mira began to fear the worst, a figure sprinted into view. Kale, battered but alive. He leaped aboard moments before the ramp sealed shut, shouting, "Punch it." The engines roared to life as Mira guided the Eclipse out of the hangar, narrowly avoiding blasts from pursuing Vorath fighters. Behind them, the fortress burned, its once impenetrable walls crumbling under the weight of rebellion. As they soared into the void, Kale collapsed into his seat, breathing heavily. "Well," he said with a wry grin, "that went better than expected." Lizara sat nearby, gazing out at the stars. "You risked everything for me. For all of us." Kale exchanged a glance with Mira, who shrugged. "Because sometimes," he replied, "doing the right thing is worth the risk." For the first time in what felt like forever, hope flickered brightly, not just for Lizara, but for everyone aboard the Eclipse. Their journey was far from over, but together, they had proven that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, light could still shine. The Eclipse streaked through the void, its engines humming steadily as it carried its unlikely crew toward safety. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and tension. They had escaped the Vorath stronghold, but no one dared to celebrate just yet. The weight of what they had accomplished, and the dangers still ahead, hung heavy in the air. Kale leaned back in his seat on the bridge, nursing a fresh bruise along his jawline. His rugged features bore the marks of their harrowing escape, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "That went better than I thought," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Mira shot him a skeptical glance from the pilot's chair. "Better. We barely made it out alive." She adjusted the controls, guiding the ship into a safer trajectory. "Still, we did it, and we've got her." She nodded toward Lizara, who stood near the viewport, gazing silently at the stars. Lizara turned at the mention of her name, her luminous eyes reflecting both gratitude and unease. "You saved me," she said softly, addressing them both. "But my people, they are still in danger." Kale frowned, sitting up straighter. "What do you mean?" "You're safe now. That's what matters." "It's not enough," Lizara replied firmly, stepping closer. "The Vorath didn't abduct me simply because I am royalty. They sought something far greater, a weapon capable of destabilizing entire star systems." Mira's brow furrowed. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" Lizara hesitated before answering, choosing her words carefully. "My people have long guarded the luminal crystals, the source of our power and prosperity. These crystals are unique. They harness cosmic energy in ways no other material can. But if misused, their energy could unravel the fabric of space itself. The Voreth discovered this secret and intend to exploit it. Kale let out a low whistle. So they're not just mining for resources. They're building an apocalypse machine. Exactly, Lizara confirmed. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the gravity of her revelation. If Vrax succeeds, countless worlds will fall under his control or be destroyed entirely. My capture was only the beginning. Silence fell over the bridge as the full scope of the situation sank in. Mira gripped the controls tighter, her knuckles white. Then we can't stop here. We need to warn your people, and anyone else who might be targeted. Kale rubbed his temples, clearly conflicted. This just got a lot bigger than a rescue mission. Are we really ready to take on an interstellar warlord? We don't have a choice, Lizara said, her tone resolute. I may be a princess, but I'm also a leader. If I abandon my responsibilities now, everything I stand for will crumble. Her determination struck a chord with both hunters. Mira glanced at Kale, silently urging him to reconsider. For his part, Kale sighed deeply, running a hand through his disheveled hair. All right, he said finally. We'll help you, but don't expect us to play hero. This is about survival. For all of us. Lizara offered a small smile, her gratitude evident. Thank you. Together, we can stop Vrax before it's too late. With their course set for Luminara, the journey gave them time to regroup and plan their next steps. Lizara shared vital information about the Voreth's operations, including details about their mining facilities and supply chains. Zin, who had joined them aboard the Eclipse, proved invaluable in analyzing this data. His technical expertise allowed them to identify potential vulnerabilities in the Voreth's infrastructure. They rely heavily on automated systems, Zin explained, pointing to a holographic map projected onto the table. Disrupt those, and their entire operation falls apart. That's easier said than done, Kale interjected. Their defenses are insane. We barely survived the last encounter. True, Zin acknowledged. But we're not alone anymore. With Princess Lizara's knowledge and the support of the freed prisoners, we have a fighting chance. As they strategized, bonds began to form among the unlikely allies. Mira found herself drawn to Lizara's quiet strength, admiring how she carried the burden of leadership without faltering. Even Kale, whose cynicism often kept others at arm's length, softened slightly around the princess. He admired her resolve, though he'd never admit it outright. One evening, as the ship drifted past a glowing nebula, Mira joined Lizara on the observation deck. The two women stood side by side, watching the vibrant colors dance across the viewport. You remind me of someone, Mira said after a moment. Someone who believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Lizara tilted her head curiously. Who was that? My sister, Mira replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. She died trying to protect innocent lives during a raid on Earth years ago. Sometimes I wonder if she'd be proud of what I've become. I think she would, Lizara said gently. You've already done so much good. Without you, I wouldn't be here. Mira smiled faintly, appreciating the sentiment. Thanks. Just promise me one thing. If we pull this off, don't let your crown go to your head. Lizara laughed softly, the sound carrying a rare warmth. I'll try. Meanwhile, Kale spent much of his time brooding in the cargo bay, tinkering with weapons and gear. Though outwardly gruff, he couldn't shake the feeling that this mission had changed him. He had always prided himself on staying detached, viewing each job as nothing more than a means to an end. Yet now, faced with the plight of Lizara's people and the horrors inflicted by the Voreth, he felt a stirring of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. You look like you're carrying the galaxy on your shoulders, Zin observed, joining him one afternoon. Kale snorted, not looking up from his work. Maybe I am. Zin chuckled. You know, most people would run from a fight like this. Not many would risk everything for strangers. Yeah, Well, call me crazy, Kale muttered. After a pause, he added, do you ever wonder if we're making a difference, or if we're just delaying the inevitable? Zin considered the question thoughtfully. Maybe it's not about winning or losing. Maybe it's about standing up when no one else will. That's how legends are born. Kale smirked wryly. Legends, huh? Don't get ahead of yourself. Still, Zin's words lingered in his mind, planting seeds of hope where doubt had once taken root. As the days passed, the group grew more cohesive, united by a shared goal. They refined their strategy, preparing for the battles to come. But even as they worked tirelessly, none of them could ignore the enormity of the task ahead. Stopping Vrax would require more than skill or courage. It would demand sacrifice. When Lizara called a final meeting to outline their approach, her voice carried a newfound authority. We cannot defeat the Vorith alone, she admitted. But together, we can ignite a spark of resistance that spreads across the stars. My people will rally to our cause, and others will follow. This is not just about saving Luminara. It's about protecting the future of all life in the galaxy. Her words resonated deeply, filling the room with a sense of unity and purpose. For the first time since embarking on this perilous journey, Kale, Mira, and their companions truly believed they could succeed. Not because victory was guaranteed, but because failure was unthinkable. As the eclipse approached Luminara's radiant skies, its passengers prepared for the fight of the eclipse descended toward Luminara, its sleek frame slicing through the planet's golden atmosphere. Below them stretched a breathtaking vista of shimmering landscapes dotted with crystalline spires that pulsed faintly with energy. The beauty was undeniable, yet beneath it lay an undercurrent of tension. Smoke rose from several locations, evidence of recent skirmishes between luminal forces and Vorith raiders. It was clear that Vrax had already begun his assault. As they landed in a secluded clearing near one of the larger cities, Kale couldn't help but feel uneasy. This place looks like it's holding on by a thread, he muttered, scanning the horizon. Ruined structures and scorched earth marred what should have been a paradise. Refugees streamed along dirt paths, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Lizara stepped off the ship first, her expression hardened by determination. She turned to address the group. We don't have much time. My people need leadership and reinforcements. We'll split up to maximize our efforts. Kale raised an eyebrow. Split up? You sure that's wise? It's necessary, Lizara replied firmly. Zin, take some of the freed prisoners and begin sabotaging Vorith supply lines. Mira, you're with me. We'll rally the Luminal Council and coordinate defenses. Kale, I need you to scout ahead and gather intel on Vrax's main force. Without knowing their numbers and positions, we can't plan effectively. Though reluctant, Kale nodded. All right, but if things go sideways, don't expect me to play hero. A small smile tugged at Lizara's lips. I wouldn't ask you to. Mira accompanied Lizara into the heart of the city, where remnants of the luminal government struggled to maintain order. Soldiers patrolled the streets, while civilians huddled in makeshift shelters, clutching whatever belongings they'd managed to salvage. The sight stirred something deep within Mira, a mixture of anger and resolve. She clenched her fists, vowing silently to protect these people no matter the cost. When they reached the council chambers, Lizara wasted no time asserting her authority. Her arrival sparked a wave of relief among the weary leaders, who had feared the worst after her capture. One elder, a frail woman with silver hair, approached her tearfully. Princess, thank the stars you've returned. We thought all hope was lost. There's still hope, Lizara assured her, her voice steady despite the weight of her responsibilities. But we must act quickly. The Vorith are relentless. They'll stop at nothing to claim our crystals. The council listened intently as Lizara outlined her strategy. Fortify key locations, mobilize every able-bodied citizen, and prepare for a counterattack. Mira stood nearby, offering suggestions based on her experience as a bounty hunter. Together, They devised a plan to retake critical areas seized by the Vorath, including a central power hub that fueled much of the city's defenses. Meanwhile, Zin led a team of volunteers to sabotage Vorath operations. Armed with improvised explosives and technical know-how, they infiltrated enemy outposts, disabling mining rigs and disrupting communication networks. Their actions bought precious time, forcing the Vorath to divert resources away from the front lines. Kale, meanwhile, ventured alone into hostile territory. His mission was simple yet perilous: locate Vrax's command center and assess its defenses. Clad in dark armor scavenged from fallen Vorath soldiers, he moved stealthily through shadowy corridors and abandoned ruins. Every step brought him closer to danger and answers. At one point, he stumbled upon a hidden chamber filled with glowing crystals mounted onto massive machines. The hum of energy vibrated through the air, sending shivers down his spine. He realized this must be part of Vrax's weapon, a horrifying fusion of technology and raw cosmic power. As he documented the scene with a handheld scanner, a chilling realization dawned on him. If completed, this device could annihilate entire star systems. Suddenly, footsteps echoed outside the chamber. Kale ducked behind a stack of crates just as a group of Vorath enforcers entered, dragging a captured luminal engineer. The poor man looked barely conscious, his face bruised and bloodied. A towering figure clad in ornate black armor followed close behind. Warlord Vrax himself. "Tell me how to activate the core," Vrax bellowed, his voice dripping with menace. When the engineer hesitated, Vrax struck him with the back of his gauntleted hand, eliciting a cry of pain. Kel's jaw tightened, his instincts screaming at him to intervene. But he knew better than to act rashly. Not here, not now. Instead, he memorized the layout of the room and noted the positions of the guards before slipping away unnoticed. Back at the council chambers, tensions ran high as reports poured in from across the region. Despite their best efforts, the Luminals were losing ground. Morale wavered, and whispers of surrender began to spread. Lizara refused to give in, rallying her people with impassioned speeches that reignited their fighting spirit. "We are the light in the darkness," she declared during one such address, standing atop the steps of the council building. "If we falter now, everything we hold dear will be lost. But if we stand together, we can overcome even the greatest odds." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring citizens, young and old, to join the fight. Even those too frail to wield weapons contributed by tending to the wounded or repairing damaged equipment. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. That night, Kale returned to share his findings. Exhausted but determined, he briefed Lizara and the others on Vrax's plans. "He's close to completing the weapon," Kale warned. "If we don't destroy it soon, there won't be anything left to save." Lizara nodded grimly. "Then we strike tomorrow, at dawn. Gather everyone who's willing to fight. This ends now." The following morning, the combined forces of humans, freed prisoners, and Luminals launched a daring assault on the Vorath stronghold. Explosions lit up the sky as fighters clashed in brutal combat. Kale fought alongside Mira, their teamwork seamless after months of partnership. Zin coordinated sabotage efforts from behind enemy lines, crippling key systems and sowing chaos among the Vorath ranks. Amidst the chaos, Lizara led a charge toward the command center, her presence galvanizing those around her. Though vastly outnumbered, her allies fought with unparalleled ferocity, driven by the belief that they were protecting something greater than themselves. Inside the fortress, Lizara confronted Vrax in a final showdown. The warlord sneered, confident in his superiority. "You think you can stop me?" he taunted. "I am unstoppable." But Lizara stood firm, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Not while there's still breath in my body." What followed was a fierce battle, each blow echoing like thunder. With support from Kale and Mira, who arrived just in time to tip the scales, Lizara managed to overpower Vrax, destroying the weapon and ending his reign of terror once and for all. As the dust settled, Survivors emerged from the wreckage, weary but victorious. Together, they had faced unimaginable odds and triumphed. And though the scars of war would linger, so too would the bonds forged in its flames, proving that unity could overcome even the darkest shadows. The aftermath of the battle was a tapestry of both devastation and hope. The once pristine spires of Luminara now bore the scars of conflict, their crystalline surfaces cracked and charred. Smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of rebuilding efforts already underway. Yet, amidst the ruins, something remarkable began to emerge, a sense of renewal, not just for the Luminals but for all who had fought alongside them. Lizara stood at the edge of the battlefield, her luminous eyes scanning the horizon. Her armor was scratched and smudged with soot, her regal bearing tempered by exhaustion. But as she watched her people work together, clearing debris, tending to the injured, and salvaging what they could, her heart swelled with pride. They had endured unimaginable hardship, yet here they were, refusing to let despair define them. Kale and Mira approached cautiously, their own gear battered from the fight. Kale's usual scowl had softened slightly, while Mira carried a look of quiet satisfaction. "You did it," she said simply, nodding toward Lizara. "Your people are going to be okay." Lizara smiled faintly, though her expression remained thoughtful. "We couldn't have done it without you, or Zin, or any of the others who stood with us. This victory belongs to everyone." Kale crossed his arms, leaning against a nearby pillar. "Yeah, well, don't get used to having us around. We're not exactly cut out for royal life." Mira nudged him playfully. "Speak for yourself. I wouldn't mind sticking around a little longer." The princess chuckled softly. "I understand your hesitation. You've earned your freedom, and your reward. But before you go, there's something I'd like to give you." She reached into a pouch at her side, pulling out a small fragment of luminal crystal. It glowed faintly, casting warm light over her hand. "This is a token of gratitude, not just from me, but from my people. It represents hope, resilience, and the promise of brighter days ahead." Kale hesitated, staring at the shimmering shard. For someone who prided himself on detachment, accepting such a gift felt oddly significant. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Thanks. Just don't make this a habit." Mira accepted hers with a grin, holding it up to the sunlight. "It's beautiful and inspiring. Maybe we'll need reminders like this when things get tough again." As they spoke, Zin joined them, accompanied by several freed prisoners who had chosen to remain on Luminara. Their faces were lined with fatigue but illuminated by determination. "The council has called a meeting," Zin announced. "They want to discuss next steps for rebuilding and forging alliances." Lizara nodded. "Good. This isn't just about recovery. It's about ensuring no one suffers under tyranny ever again." The council chambers buzzed with activity as representatives from various factions gathered to deliberate. Humans, Luminals, and even some former captives of the Voreth sat side by side, united by shared experiences and goals. Lizara addressed the assembly, her voice steady and commanding. "We've proven that unity can overcome division," she began. "But our work is far from over. The Voreth may be defeated, but their legacy of exploitation and fear remains. To prevent history from repeating itself, we must build a coalition, a network of worlds committed to peace, justice, and mutual support." Her words sparked lively debate, with participants offering ideas ranging from establishing trade agreements to creating a galactic defense force. Mira listened intently, marveling at how quickly enemies had become allies. Even Kale seemed impressed, though he kept his thoughts to himself. After hours of discussion, a tentative plan took shape. Representatives agreed to form a council representing diverse species, tasked with addressing grievances, mediating disputes, and fostering cooperation. Luminara would serve as its provisional headquarters, symbolizing the light that guided them through darkness. When the meeting concluded, Lizara turned to Kale and Mira. "Will you stay?" at least until the foundation is laid. Kale shook his head firmly. Not our fight anymore. Besides, there are still plenty of places that need help, people who haven't found their way yet. Mira nodded in agreement. He's right, but we'll carry your message with us. Hope spreads fastest when it's shared. Lazara understood their decision, though a hint of sadness flickered in her gaze. Then go with my blessing. And my thanks. May the stars guide you. Days later, the Eclipse prepared for departure. Its crew had grown accustomed to the comforts of Luminara, but the open skies beckoned once more. As they boarded, Kale paused briefly to glance back at the planet. For the first time in years, he felt a pang of regret leaving behind something meaningful. Mira noticed his hesitation and grinned. What's wrong? Missing the royalty already? Don't push it, Kale muttered, though there was no real bite in his tone. Inside the cockpit, Mira took her seat, gripping the controls with familiar ease, ready to see what's next. Kale settled into the co-pilot's chair, adjusting his harness. Always. With a roar of engines, the Eclipse lifted off, soaring into the endless expanse of space. Behind them, Luminara shrank into a distant glow, its light fading but never forgotten. Weeks passed as the bounty hunters resumed their nomadic lifestyle, drifting from one mission to the next. Yet the memory of Luminara lingered, shaping their choices in subtle ways. When they encountered oppressed colonies or struggling outposts, they didn't hesitate to lend a hand, even if it meant turning down lucrative contracts elsewhere. One evening, as the ship drifted past a glittering nebula, Mira pulled out her fragment of luminal crystal. Holding it up to the viewport, she watched as its glow reflected off the swirling colors outside. "Do you ever wonder if we made a difference?" she asked quietly. Kale glanced at her, then back at the stars. Maybe. Or maybe we just gave them a chance to make a difference themselves. Mira smiled, tucking the crystal safely away. Either way, I think we're doing all right. For the first time in a long while, Kale allowed himself a rare smile. Yeah, we're doing all right. And so the Eclipse continued its journey, carrying two unlikely heroes, and a spark of hope, into the unknown. Though their path remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Wherever they went, they left behind ripples of change, proving that even in the vastness of the galaxy, every action mattered. Far away on Luminara, Lazara gazed at the night sky, her thoughts drifting to the duo who had risked everything to save her world. She clutched her own fragment of crystal, feeling its warmth resonate with her resolve. Together, across the stars, disparate lives intertwined, bound by courage, compassion, and an unyielding belief in a better future.